So happy that everyone could be here. And for those of you who have already seen the show, it is sublime. I just heard that reaction to it, and I really do concur. I think it is extraordinary. I'm Tracy Hall. I am Deputy Commissioner of the Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events, and it is my great joy to welcome you here to the Chicago Cultural Center. We are celebrating several marvelous fall exhibitions here tonight, and it seems really fitting that we would be here all together on an eve, really, just over a day, just a day and a week before the opening of Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture, which is long overdue. So on the eve of that, it seems fitting that we would be gathered here together in this room to focus on the magnificent work of Norman Lewis. This important exhibition comes to us from the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts in Philadelphia, the nation's first museum and first school of fine arts. We are fortunate to have David R. Brigham, President and CEO of the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Art here, and he's with us tonight, so can you raise, there he is, thank you. And we are so pleased that David, along with several other lenders to the exhibition, were able to join us for this evening's celebration, and we'll talk and we'll allow them to be acknowledged in just a moment. Ruth Fine, as well, curator of this exhibition, we are so grateful. Procession, the art of Norman Lewis, and she's a driving force behind what we get to enjoy tonight. And so we want to thank you, Ruth. I had an opportunity to see the work, and Ruth was there, and I was having a moment. I was really close to tears, and I just want to thank you, Ruth, and definitely. Thank you for being in conversation with us tonight. Also, we must thank the generous lenders to this exhibition who allowed us to see these pieces as a body of work and the progression of an artist's career. I'm going to ask the lenders to the exhibition, if you're here tonight, if you would stand and be recognized for your generosity. Finally, we want to thank the Terra Foundation for American Art. Terra is a great supporter of the Chicago presentation of the exhibition and of the department in general. And so if our friends from the Terra Foundation are here, if you would also be acknowledged. This exhibition is a step towards rectifying an inaccuracy in the art history canon. It brings overdue attention to this great but long neglected artist who was at the center of the New York art world from the 1930s through the 1970s. And we know that there are so many other artists who, like Lewis, deserve a similar level of reflection on their work and their contributions to the world of art. It is the absolute work of this department, and perhaps the work of all of us in this room, to work tirelessly to ensure that the story of culture in this country and in this city is a story told in full. May what we see and say here tonight be a reminder of that obligation. And now, please join me as I welcome Daniel Schulman. Danny is the director of DCASE's Visual Arts Program. The genesis and the execution of this exhibition and this night really relied on his supervision and on the work of his truly exceptional team. So as Danny comes, I'm going to ask the members of the visual arts team who are here tonight to just stand and be acknowledged. Danny Schulman.
Thanks, Tracy, very much. I'm so glad you were able to welcome everyone because of your generosity and your warmth and your leadership. Tracy is moving on to a new position at the Joyce Foundation in a few weeks, so I'm very sorry to lose her as a leader and a colleague, and I want to thank you for all you've done for the department. This is so great. This is the ideal show, the ideal audience, the ideal panel. I feel like I'm in very special company. And before I introduce you, I just want to make sure I really thank you personally and for real. I thought about this very carefully, and I went to Dawood first, along with Ruth, to talk about a panel. Dawood really helped me put this together and urged me to do certain things to make sure we had the right panel. So I really thank you for the stimulation to really get the best panel. Yeah, thank you. So I'll get to the panel in just a minute, but I do have a few more people to thank. It's been my great pleasure and honor to coordinate the Chicago presentation of this historic exhibition organized by the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts and curated by Ruth Fine. And I wanted to echo Tracy's recognition of David Brigham, Ruth, and the staff at the Pennsylvania Academy, the lenders who have entrusted their treasures with a hungry, very hungry Chicago audience, and the Terra Foundation for American Art for helping to make the Chicago presentation possible. Before introducing our panel, I wanted also to mention that this is a special evening for the Chicago Cultural Center, in which several new shows are sharing an opening celebration. In addition to the Norman Lewis exhibition, I recognize my curatorial colleagues, as Tracy so generously did, and the artists who are showing tonight. First, Wendy Miller, who organized Paul Catanese' Visible from Space exhibition in the Yates Gallery. It's perpendicular to Exhibit Hall, where Procession is. And if you really need to witness a blimp flight, one will be taking place at 7 p.m. tonight with Paul piloting. There will also be a live feed on the internet that Paul will be broadcasting globally tonight. And you can check out that by going to the show and looking at the pamphlet there. I also would like to recognize Greg Lunsford, the curator of exhibitions here, who I couldn't have done Norman Lewis without. We were hanging labels at 4 p.m. this afternoon together, finishing things off. Greg curated the exhibition on the second floor in the Chicago Rooms, Parsons and Charlesworth's Spectacular Vernacular, with the work of guest critic Leanne Norman, and I think Leanne is here tonight. Nathan Mason, one of our curators of public art, along with Wendy, organized the Chakiah Booker exhibition in Millennium Park, so please don't forget to go across the street and see that wonderful exhibition. And also the artists Tom Denlinger, Laura Davis, and Krista Franklin, downstairs in the Michigan Avenue galleries. All of these artists are examples of how vibrant and how smart and how extraordinary artists who are working in Chicago are. So I'm so pleased to be a platform for that work. I also want to call out another program that we've got, a cohort of artists and curators in residence, managed by my colleague Susan Friel and supported by a grant from the Joyce Foundation. The artists this year are Alejandro Diaz-Pereira and Cara Lewis, whose project 34,000 Pillows is on view in the Garland Gallery right now on the first floor. Rochelle Marie Brown, Nicole Merrican, Andres Hernandez, Aram Han, Jacob Young, Paula Cabal will all be in residence this year with curators in residence, Gibran Villalobos, Will Ruggiero, and Cecilia Vargas. So there's a huge crowd of artists and creators here tonight who are represented. So I want to thank you all. And if you needed more, there is more. There is an incredible program called the World Music Festival, and there's a performance going on tonight of performers from Sardinia, Italy, in Preston Bradley Hall. So please stroll by there and see that, and enjoy the space as well. And now I'd like to introduce our panelists. Ruth Fine, Dawood Bey, Torkwasi Dyson, and Amanda Williams, who will be discussing their work and their histories in the light of Norman Lewis. And we'll have about 35 to 45 minutes of discussion, and then I think we'll have a few minutes for questions from the audience, and we've got a mic set up there, so when we're winding down, if people would like to stand before the mic and ask a few questions, I think we'll take a little time for that if we have it. Ruth Fine retired from the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. in 2012 after a 4-decade career, highlights of which include organizing the highly acclaimed retrospective, The Art of Romare Bearden, as well as exhibitions of the art of John Nairn, Helen Frankenthaler, Jasper Johns, Roy Lichtenstein, and Georgia O'Keeffe, among others. Fine also conceived and oversaw the Dorothy and Herbert Vogel 50 Works for 50 States project. She chairs the board of the Roy Lichtenstein Foundation and serves on the boards of the Terra Foundation for American Art, the Fabric Workshop and Museum in Philadelphia. She contributed Abstraction and Identity, Norman Lewis, and the Activity of Discovery to the Image of the Black in Western Art, Volume 4, The Rise of Black Artists for Harvard University Press in 2014. In addition to organizing Procession, Fine contributed to the catalog of the recent exhibition of Martin Puryear's drawings, prints, and small sculpture at the Art Institute of Chicago, which was the perfect exhibition and a wonderful book as well. Ruth is also something that I didn't know, because I think she's that modest, is a practicing artist focusing on making prints, drawings, and artist books. Ruth, thank you so much for being here. Dawood Bey began his career as an artist in 1975 with a series of photographs that are very familiar to all of us, Harlem, USA, that were later exhibited in his first one-person exhibition at the Studio Museum in Harlem in 1979, while he was an artist in residence at the museum. Since then, he's had numerous exhibitions worldwide at institutions including the Addison Gallery of American Art, the Art Institute of Chicago, the Brooklyn Museum, the Detroit Institute of Arts. Sorry, I'm going too fast for all of these august institutions, the FOG, the High Museum of Art in Atlanta, the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago, the Museum of Modern Art in New York, the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, and the Whitney Museum of American Art. You've earned a tremendous amount of success and recognition. Congratulations. Dawood is also an amazing teacher, and your students say a lot about your work as a teacher. Wonderful artists. Class Pictures, Photographs by Dawood Bey was published by Aperture in 2007, and Harlem, USA was published by Yale Press in conjunction with the Art Institute in 2012, where the work was exhibited in its entirety for the first time since it was shown at the Studio Museum in '79. A survey exhibition of his work, Picturing People, was at the Renaissance Society at the U of C in 2012. His recent Birmingham project commemorates the death of the 4 girls who were killed in the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, on September 15th, correct, of 1963. The show opened at the Birmingham Museum and traveled to the Eastman House. Bey's most recent project is here on view in Chicago at the Stephen Dater Gallery, Harlem Redux. Dawood Bey holds a Master of Fine Arts from Yale University School of Art and is currently a professor of art and Distinguished College Artist at Columbia College Chicago, where he has taught since 1998. He's been honored with numerous fellowships over the course of his long career, including the United States Artist Award in 2015, a Guggenheim Fellowship in 2002, and a fellowship from the National Endowment for the Arts in 1991. Torkwasi Dyson distills the language of architecture and landscape architecture to generate an idiosyncratic language that is both, oh, you changed the slides for me. Excellent, mind read. Torkwasi's image is on the right, upper right. Idiosyncratic language that is both meditative and structural. The works are deconstructions of natural and built environments that consider how individuals negotiate and negate various types of systems and systemic order. Dyson's work has been exhibited at Postmasters Gallery, Kravitz Webby, the Studio Museum in Harlem, the Whitney Museum, the Corcoran College of Art and Design, the Schuylkill, is that the Philadelphia pronunciation? Thank you. Center for Environmental Education in the Smithsonian National Museum of African Art. She's been awarded the Nancy Graves Grant for Visual Artist, Visiting Artist Grant to the Nicholas School of the Environment, the Culture Push Fellowship for Utopian Practices, and the FSP Jerome Fellowship and Yaddo. Dyson's work has also been supported by I-Beam, the Laundromat Projects, Green Festival of New York, the Center for Documentary Studies at Duke, Mural Arts Program in Philadelphia, the Kitchen, and the Rebuild Foundation here in Chicago. Torquasi is now based in Brooklyn, New York, and a visiting critic in painting and printmaking at Yale, at the Yale School of Art. And finally, Amanda Williams is a visual artist and trained architect. A native of Chicago's Auburn Gresham neighborhood, Williams is best known for her public art installation series, Colored Theory, in which she painted the exterior of soon-to-be-demolished homes using a culturally charged color palette to mark the pervasiveness of vacancy and blight in Black communities. The landscapes in which she operates are the visual residue of the invisible policies and forces that have misshaped most inner cities. And I'm sure most of you will know Amanda's work and remember it from the Architecture Biennial and the kind of wonderful presence in Chicago. Amanda is a highly sought after lecturer and the subject of many articles on the relationship between art, race, and urbanism. She is the recent recipient of the Pulitzer Foundation, PXSTL Public Art Commission, and has forthcoming solo exhibitions at the Arts Club of Chicago, the MCA in Chicago. Amanda is a graduate of the Cornell University School of Architecture and adjunct associate professor at the Illinois Institute of Technology. So I'm so pleased that you could all join us and live through those long and wonderful introductions. I couldn't edit them. So we can actually eliminate the slides and just focus on the dialogue. And I think I'd like to leave it to, I'd like to begin with Ruth to speak to her experience researching and shaping the exhibition, and then we'll start talking about Lewis among the artists as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. What wonderful people to be on the stage. I'm thrilled. And thrilled that so many of the lenders are here. And I just have a few additional thank yous I'd like to make. Because exhibitions are collaborative events in every respect. And in addition to David Brigham for wanting to do the show, I'm eager to thank Taryn Fuller, whose mother, Rita Lewis, was married to our dear friend Norman, and Rita, and then Taryn shepherded this work so that we are able to have it to look at. And Taryn has this astonishing husband named Vincent Ransom, who allowed me to camp on they both allowed me to camp in their Newark home so that I could do the research I needed to do. And likewise, it's facilitated by Michael Rosenfeld and his wonderful wife, Hallie, who are handling Norman Lewis's estate. And they're all here, and I thank all of them for their help. It was many, many years that we were glued at the hip. My interest in Norman Lewis goes back decades. I was introduced to the work basically by works on paper, which were the main focus of much of my career, and I was totally blown away by their originality, their beauty, their concern with process, the range of subjects that were alluded to in these spectacular objects. And I then did an exhibition of Romeo Bearden, as Ben mentioned, and when I was working on a Bearden show, I saw a lot of Lewis's canvases, and so my knowledge of him was expanded dramatically at that point. But Lewis was not necessarily an easy sell for people in terms of doing an exhibition of his work. He was a complicated artist. He didn't have a singular image. He did many things. He did many things all at once. And it took many years for the exhibition to kind of start to take form. But it started to take form about 5 years ago. And the decision was to include paintings and works on paper because they were equally important to him. And one of the things that most interested me about his work was that you often didn't know where a painting stopped and a drawing or work on paper started. That his concern seemed always to be with the drawn mark and the painted mark. And those of you who've seen the catalog or saw the exhibition in Philadelphia will know that he also made objects as well. But his concern with nature, his concern with the city, his concern with the human figure, his concern with fog, with crowds, with motion, the fact that he was engaged by abstraction from the 30s on, even the figurative work never seemed to me to be about social realism any more than the abstract work seemed to me to be about abstract expressionism. And so in working with Lewis and his art, it was my hope to I guess, complicate the knowledge of him, to make clear that he was an artist who was a brilliant colorist, as well as an artist who made black paintings, which is what he was known as. To make clear that his concern with the figure lasted to the very end of his life, even though that's not the first thing you necessarily see when you look at the work. And so the latest works in the exhibition are from 1978 and emphasize the figure. The earliest works in the exhibition are from 1932. And the only other thing I really want to say about the exhibition, especially since some of you are here, is that as a curator, it always seemed to me that one of the greatest honors was to be able to go into private homes, to call people up and say, I'd like to come visit to see your treasures. And that not everybody can do that. And so most of the exhibition is comprised of works from private collections rather than from museum collections, because we can all go to museums, and if the works aren't on the wall, if we know it, we can ask to see them anyway. Not everybody knows that, but I'm telling you. Whereas to have things lent by private people is very special, and it shows a very special kind of generosity. It's always been my sense that Lewis's the complicated nature of Lewis's work was because he was living in multiple worlds in a very large way, that he was involved with all of the Harlem art community and much of the downtown art community, and that he was engaged by issues that were being discussed in Harlem and engaged by issues that were being discussed downtown. And he was a brilliant and curious man who had a wonderful library. He always taught of himself, he talked of himself as being self-taught, and I think the reason for that, despite that he did attend classes and teach in various institutions in Harlem at Columbia University, was that the education that really mattered to him was the education that he gave himself by reading books and by going to galleries and going to museums. And I said that at a certain point, and someone said to me, you mean he's an outsider artist? And I said, no, I don't mean he's an outsider artist. He's anything but an outsider artist. Anyway, that's all I want to say. I've been talking about Lewis for years and years and years, so I'm hoping that the other three people on the stage are going to do all the rest of the talking. And I think you're now going to take over.
Well, I You know, as some of you might know, my work for the past 40 some odd years had been primarily photo-based. I make photographs. I have made photographs for a very long time. Prior to becoming a photographer, I was a musician. I'm a drummer. Playing primarily jazz, profoundly influenced by John Coltrane, whose music probably changed the shape of my life. So along with this background in music, performing improvisational music, I came of age in New York at a moment when I was able to, for example, meet Norman Lewis, whose work I knew about, whose work I had a lot of respect for. I was rather young, so I was too shy to have the conversation with him that I would have liked to have had, but I had the presence of mind to go up to him at an opening of the studio in Harlem to shake his hand. I wanted to touch him. I wanted to shake his hand. But along with Norman Lewis, there was a group of artists who were my first artist mentors, you might call them. Ed Clark was certainly one of them. And Ed Clark was a contemporary of Norman. And then along with Ed Clark, the younger generation, who would be Green T. Williams, Mel Edwards, Jack Whitten, Bill Hudson. I came to know their work very well from spending time with them in their studios, looking at and talking about their work. I was very fortunate in that they embraced me. And so very early on, I guess you could say, I became deeply familiar with and conversing in the language of their work, the visual and conceptual language of abstraction, which has led me over the years. I've organized a number of panels about African American artists and abstraction, mostly from Val Edwards and William T's generation, that generation of the 1960s, when black artists working within the abstract idiom was a very contentious issue. Because if you think about where we were in American history in 1968, 1969, the lines were pretty clearly and dramatically drawn. So it was deeply meaningful to me to be able to meet these artists who were engaging in this practice in a very deep kind of way. So that's my initial relationship to both Norman Lewis's work and a whole generation of artists, African American artists, who work within the idiom of abstraction. I probably had my first significantly disturbing moment around this history that I had come to know when I sought to deepen my knowledge about that particular moment in the 1950s, the 10th Street Gallery days, of which Norman Lewis and Ed Clark were very, very central figures in our history at that moment. And so, as a young, I guess I now realize, somewhat naive young artist, a book called New York School came out, and knowing for sure that Norman Lewis and Ed Clark would be in the book. I went out and bought the book. That was a formal book documenting and researching that particular moment. And I bought the book. I started flipping through it. And then I went to the index, looking for Lewis, Norman, Clark, Edward. And to my utter dismay, neither one of them were included in this formative book that was purporting to be the definitive history of that moment that both of those African American artists are very much a part of. That it was probably a very profound moment of understanding how certain kinds of erasures take place, how certain artists are dramatically written out of history in ways that, given how extensively researched that book was, I never believed to be coincidental or accidental. And we were talking about this the other day because when that formative research does not exist within the canon, which is the foundation for the history to be written afterwards, it then becomes that much more difficult to do exhibitions like this. And that is something that was, for me, a profound moment of awakening. Not, of course, that I did not know that racism existed, but to see that within the context of our history. So, that was a moment that has stayed with me and makes me that much more appreciative that this exhibition is taking place. Because I know how difficult it is to do things when the supporting material doesn't exist. So that other people realize the value of that work because of the research that's been devoted to it. So I don't want to go too far down that path because I can go all the way down that path. But, it's, there's something to be said for how important exhibitions and publications, such as the one that you've done, are. The other thing that I just want to mention briefly, late last year, some of you may recall that Norman Lewis appeared on the front page of the New York Times. I think the artist is called Black Artists Are Marching into the Museum. Yeah, Black Artists are marching into the museum. Not walk. Was march into the museum, and Norman, what the photograph that was on the cover. I was in San Francisco at the time, and when the article came out, my phone started vibrating. Everyone was excited. Did you see Norman on the front page of the New York Times? And I just had to shake my head because, just from what you just said about how difficult to sell this exhibition has been, the notion that Black artists are marching into the museum is, I think we would say it's questionable. Although there are a number of African American artists shown in museums. So this issue of erasure or omission is something I think that we still have to contend with, struggle against, and do the research to continue to form even now, find a source to make a publication.
But it's very complicated in the sense that one of the things we realized was that Norman Lewis was in 132 group exhibitions during his lifetime.
Oh, wow.
There are only 130 listed in the catalog. There are about 2 more after the catalog was published, which means there probably are more. and a dozen one-person exhibitions. There may be more of those as well. And a lot of press, a lot of articles, enthusiastic articles, most of which did not mention race. And so there's a strange and complicated history. But one of the things that I hope we'll really talk about, which interests me a lot, is what he means to you as artists today. I mean, we have a show upstairs. It's been to 2 other places. Artists seem immensely enthusiastic about the exhibition. They were, I think, in Philadelphia. The Pennsylvania Academy is tied to the school. And I saw the students in there all the time. The show was in Texas. I wasn't as aware there, but just a few people that have been through here. And you know, this is an artist who's been dead since 1979. We all look at artists who have been dead for hundreds of years, but I'm dying to know what you all think about him and how having an exhibition like this had an impact on you. And you.
So I come at it slightly differently. So I studied architecture and loved art, but sort of thought it was this, this thing that would sort of fuel my architectural practice. So I was first introduced to his work through an African American art history course that was taught by Salah Hassan at Cornell. And so I was also painting at the time, but as I'm learning still, the schism between the contemporary art world and the architectural world is very big. And so even in school, I had to pretend to be an art major to even get into those classes. So they knew that I was a painter, and so Salah but Salah knew I was also an architecture major. So it introduced me to his work, and initially I thought because of the canvases, because of the painted work. But I think really it was a moment to help me understand the idea of process, and also that you don't need to be pigeonholed. So I didn't understand it at the time, right? Because I was just doing whatever I felt like doing. But the notion that all these things could inform each other. So each layer you kind of unravel and thinking about, you said something right in the beginning about wanting to make a show that sort of complicated things and show that he worked on many things at the same time. And I think there's this desire to make people one thing, or to have one, and you always get nervous when they're like, pick an image that describes you, and if you do 12 things, you either figure out how to hide them and only present them to whoever needs to know at the time, or you get a moment where you get to be all of yourselves and people can honor and appreciate that. So I was excited that it became this thing to go back to, his work became this thing to go back to, and then eventually his practice and his process becomes this thing that I can continue to go back to and think about. How to not be afraid to honor that, and I feel like I oscillate between being very deeply intrigued with the work itself, especially the color for me, and sort of thinking of him in a whole array of people that were dealing with color and can inform the kinds of things I'm interested in. But then also now, the kind of privilege to be able to be sitting here and having these conversations, so to go from you opening the book and, kind of expecting to see these names and they not be there, to me now being able to expect that those are references that I have at my disposal. And I think the other kind of underlying thing for me is the importance of these private collections. So Pamela Joyner, who's a huge supporter of mine and a collector of Norman's work, seeing the work in person was at her house for the first time. And so to have the ability to sit with these things, right, prolonged moments, right, I think is invaluable. It's something that didn't exist in the moment you were talking about this kind of conflict, right? And so to kind of be thinking of work and making work in the kind of generation or moment just after that seems like so hugely luxurious. It feels like, even though there's so much more work to do, the fact that there's 20 Norman Lewises in here. I could name 15 artists in here that are going to go down in history and will be written about and are actively being written about. And, we're just one place. So for me, it's this kind of like amazement, and I shouldn't be amazed, right? The work can be giving back so much, that his life can be giving back so much constantly. So it wasn't just initially this expectation that he'd be in this cool, art history book with the Ed Clarks and the Vermeer Beards, and you sort of you know, tick them off, but that it's bigger than that, than just this one moment where you sort of glean a little bit of aesthetics from one thing that you're thinking about doing, but that this can inform you repeatedly over time for different ways. And music is like that in a lot of ways. So I like when you were kind of connecting it, not directly, right, but connecting it to this idea of the drumming or just a moment in your own practice and development.
I feel very similarly when thinking about practice and process. And where I enter it directly is through the making and rendering of line in his work. And I'm super interested in the sort of unpacking of the expressionistic mark in painting and drawing in particular, as a sort of through way to thinking about how Black expression it was then and now being hidden and suppressed and being invisible, right? So even expression is this body movement mark, right? So when I look at his paintings and I see the way in which he handles the brush, he handles the pen, the ink, I slow down my looking. And then I think about other the expressionists who were working in that vein, making on canvas. And I consider the economic and social conditions, and then I immediately consider my own. And then take what I inherit from those forms, and then apply it to what I'm specifically interested in, and that is environmental concerns. And I understand that they are not looking and making to sort of read a conversation in form necessarily. I think that they're looking and making, trying to figure out what systems do in painting. Right? So there's a history there. So I sort of follow his work. So I've been following his work for a while and trying to just pin in the ways in which he uses mark to talk about space, because I'm interested in space and architecture. The way he uses the brush, the medium, painting, to think about speed, right, and density. He's a density master, right? So when you follow these paintings and you follow these drawings, you're immediately engaged by his compositions and wealth of volume. So those things to me really speak to environmental concerns today, which I'm trying to do in sort of my own work, right? And I look at someone like a Julie Meritu and someone like a Mark Rappert, and I understand the mark, right? And the sort of macro global exchange conversation that they have going on in their work. And then I think about, go back to a Norman, I go back to an Alma, I go back to a Kandinsky. I can go back, I've been recently thinking about Matisse's relationship to Cezanne and saying, okay, well, what is the individual moment in shift, right? So where's the macro and the micro, and where do artists look for that shift in other artists, right? So I look at those artists and then I try to determine how I respond to that, and I think I'm interested in the micro, right? So that's, you know, immediately about the expressionistic, the subjectivity, my own individuality, in relationship to all of these other systemic orders. So he is a person, right, that I look at and I understand what are the paintings doing? What is his practice doing? Where does the sculpture, the drawing, and the painting sort of overlap, right? Because it's for me, it's a hugely sort of didactic system going on that I think is immensely prolific.
I think it can be overlooked too that, at least for me, like a notion of women being abstractionists, especially Black women being abstract painters, I just didn't pay attention to. That's what I wanted to do. I was studying architecture, so I wasn't really paying attention like I should have been to the kind of lineage and what these voids or these erasures or absences were. So it was much more interest in the mark because of this toggle or this obsession in architecture with a line has to convey 20 different things through language, and then what does that mean when it's a brush, or when it's not a line, or it's a volume, or it's a plane, or or it's color, or, and so to reach a moment when I was starting to make abstract oil paintings, and then people are saying, what are you doing? That's not what Black women do. What are you doing, right? It's like, well, no. See the line here, and the line is, when you started kind of going through this kind of question about what is the artist doing with the line, when do they look for the shifts in the other artists, I was so ingrained in that it didn't dawn upon me. Again, I keep using the word luxury, right? That there was a moment when we needed to make representation, when Black artists, it was hugely critical, you know, and so to sort of naively or ignorantly stumble upon the desire to just do what you want to do, and that's like not straight to abstraction, right? Obviously I've been trained, but that was something I had permission to do because I did have these, you know, very few, right, but these reference points, these images to look at, and this ability to kind of nibble on these things like brownies, right, like to just be ingrained in these works, or to kind of, you know, really mine them for these things they can be giving to you. But, you know, but just also the idea that abstraction, and, you know, it's not lost on me that we're sitting here and the kind of curating of this idea that of course we could be having this conversation, right, that I keep coming back to this moment where you open this book, right, and these people that should be there are not there. And now to fast forward and to start thinking about, you know, through naivete or through a few publications that we can kind of all hold on to, that it's not preposterous that Black artists or art students can start with abstraction. You can start with calculus before addition, right? Like you could, like it's not a this or that, or it's not a this and then you graduate to that, right? And that's kind of how I felt it being presented to me when I started to really sort of, you know, share with people that this is what I thought was my best form of expression, at least in that moment, or this is the kind of mark that made the most sense to me. And then to be met with resistance of that kind of mark was kind of baffling. So I really kind of resonated with what you were saying about when you were kind of going backwards and tying all these things together. It's like super exciting to think about it like that.
You know, because I think, you know, one of the things that I think about certainly in relation to your work is the way in which what we call abstraction. I'm always more comfortable with that. What we call abstraction can contain rich meaning in the larger social world. You know, that abstraction does not necessarily mean what some people made abstraction mean in very sense.
Absolutely right.
That a form of language that references and refers only to itself, and that the meaning of the work resides inside of the object,
Right.
and that there was no relation to the larger social world. You know, and I think what's interesting to me about both of the works is how you have in fact been able to very effectively use the language, which is what abstraction is for me. To use the language and then to infuse that language with social content. To use the language to speak about whatever one wants to speak about. But language is not prescriptive. We go down to language and speak about any number of things. And I think there's a tremendous amount of freedom in the realization of that. And part of what can propel that is this knowledge of your predecessors, such as Kant's, Norman Lewis. Like, there is this foundation on which, you know, the work rests, not just in the broader sense, but in terms of the history that the preceding generation of African American artists control. You know, like those battles don't have to be fought and refought and refought. They've been fought already. You know, so that, you know, to me, is the importance of your work. And that's my sense of it. Anyway, I'm just wondering, strong sense of your work in relation to what we call abstraction, and the degree to which you're able to bring the world into that, I guess we say formalized space.
I mean, I feel like the work that I'm doing is evidence of that, but I'm struggling every day with it in a material sense. So there's like tears every other day about like painting in the literal sense, or like, you know, pigment on two-dimensional surface, and then the idea of transcending that, or the work already being ahead of where I'm maybe even understanding it, right? So, you know, that's a great struggle to have, but this moment where you're really trying to make sense of just how much the work is helping you transcend these kind of, this language, or like it's already infused with a lot of that stuff, and then how do you really understand that to exploit it and continue to take it to the next level? So, you know, so not only going back, but being able to have peers. I think I called Turquoise in like February. It's like, I just need to talk to you, and what are you doing right now? Like, just kind of, just thinking through other people and what they're doing in their practice, in their moment. And she said, let's Skype, right? So, but like being able to have that as a reference point for, you know, not just the form making. I think that's what the kind of general public sees sometimes when they go to these exhibitions or these works, and they don't necessarily think about the joy and these moments of struggle that then create the next thing or become transcendent, or, you know, are so wonderful. They speak to people in ways you can't even verbalize yourself.
I love that question because it
Abstraction
always,
is social content.
right, because it always like gives me a chance to talk about Ida B. Wells, and anytime I get a chance to talk about Ida B. Wells, I'm for it. So I'm really interested in this notion that I'm thinking about called illegal abstraction. And it is an idea that I'm thinking about after reading Byron Wagner's book on policing. And what he talks about is Ida B. Wells taking pamphlets of vagrants, right? So vagrant signs of Black people who were needed to be caught after doing some weird crime. The texts and the publications that were sort of fed to the public and all of this media, print media at the time, completely misrepresented the individual. So Ida, very much like Bearden, would start taking apart these images and reconfiguring them. And that is, for me, a way of responding to a legalized abstraction through policy and law, right? So it was policy, but that became law, and you know, that resulted in the deaths of uncountable Black people as it pertains to a crime that they committed, right? So there was a direct link to punishment and crime, right? And law and policy, and advertising and hunting people down based on images, right? So I'm sorry, I'm still thinking about this idea. So of course, Ida B. Wells, being in the anti-lynching movement, being a writer and a publisher herself, when I came across this action that she was doing to sort of debunk these advertisements and the way they're represented, oftentimes innocent people, that was her act of abstracting, right? What had been illegal abstraction. Right? So I'm like, wow, what if that is all true? And what can I do with that notion of abstraction being a phenomenon that continues to make legal the policing and hunting down Black and brown bodies globally? So I'm interested in abstraction. I mean, I can paint, I'm a painter, I make drawings, that's what I can do. So I can use those languages to talk and to think about painting. But I'm really interested in abstraction as a sort of social order system. And taking those kinds of license of unkeeping, which we talked about before, deconstructing things that by law are abstracted, right? Untrue, a lie, a misrepresentation. And then reorganizing them, which is not a new thing for image making, but I'm really interested in how to apply that to, again, environmental concerns, which is about architecture, infrastructure, and placemaking, right? So I'm with my paintings and my sculptures, now trying to figure out how to really tell the story of infrastructure and Robert Moses, really tell the story of unincorporated towns, really tell the story of Katrina in the levees, right? Because we were led to believe, right, the Army Corps of Engineers created an infrastructure that could support, any kind of residue from climate change. And so, because of the history of environmental racism, right, then climate change is exacerbating that sort of environmental issue. So I'm diving into those kinds of, I think, illegal abstraction, because legalized abstraction is a daunting thought in an environmental and spatial problem. I'm thinking through this right now. So that's a really raw moment in my thinking about where abstraction.
What kind of formal object where those ideas coalesce? Like why that kind of object? There are any number of ways that information can be visualized. You get a particular language in which you visualize technologies, language, the modern language.
Right, yeah, I'm really tying that in to really formal decisions, line, space, transparencies, density, the grid. I'm always starting with the grid. I'm deconstructing the grid. And as I'm thinking about geography, architecture, oftentimes elevation views. So it's a way to sort of think about, and I, am developing that right now in my studio, how to visualize these spatial problems through the language of the distilled, and measuring in symbols of trees to talk about the different kinds of history. So yeah, I'm gathering that now in my studio. So when I look at the Norman Lewis paintings and I look at the KKK paintings, I'm really interested in the way in which those Plano systems work to talk about multiple figures and multiple systems, the stacking, right? And the sort of where the light comes in the center, when he centralizes those pieces, to think about vision at night, right? And to think about the kind of environmental terrorism that the KKK caused. So I'm always connecting those things. So,
I'm curious when thinking about, and again you alluded to it in your kind of opening statements, the idea of toggling between media as a way to just be studying something for something else, or and then another one being committed to a certain medium in order to work through a problem when I'm listening here. So I'm curious also with Daoud, being committed to photography, for the duration of your career, but also having these other creative outlets or form making, a little bit about maybe how, not only just in looking at the work, but do you use that as a strategy to kind of work through issues with photography through drumming or through food or through other, thinking about when you were saying doing many things at the same time, like how often we actually are working through a question or an idea, but with drawing, with representation or figuration, when it's really just for abstraction, or in my mind, I was painting houses to improve painting, not architecture, right? And so how do you kind of think about
for me, in terms of the photograph and object, we're still, the relationship between my work and painting, for example, I look at a lot, both the photograph and the painting is about creating on some level this illusion of space on the two-dimensional surface. It's kind of like fundamental. We don't want it to just sit on the surface. We want that two-dimensional surface to have some sense of space, which of course is an illusion. It's a flat canvas or a flat piece of photographic paper. But part of what I do, both in terms of the way I visualize the subject I'm interested in, has to do with both the form structure and then the optical manipulation that I have at my disposal to create different kinds of descriptive spaces within the photograph. Now, this thing that we call a shallow depth of field pushes towards, the foreground of that space. Deep depth of field has this sense of a deep space, which is all, it's an illusion of a kind. And part of the narrative has to do with the quality of its optical description. There's earlier works of mine. I tell people all of the interior photographs that I made over a very long time came out of my reading of Vermeer and de Hoot, who won me a beard in the painter's mind. Bearden broke that down for me. Vermeer and de Hoot, the architecture of space and the fluidity of the human subject overlaid onto the architecture of space. I don't think there's a single interior portrait that I ever made that's not completely indebted to most of those painters. And I came to those painters through Bearden. Some of whom were mirrors of painters that started me because I just Bearden learned from it. Bearden pointed me to it. And so I came to learn from that work too. So for me, there's always the form, the object, the photographic object. And then there's the content. There's always those two things. Each of which has to be addressed both, they have to be addressed separately, but you can't put them apart. Because the two of them together, that is to say. So I think now, in my more recent work, in which the human subject is not central to the work, I'm thinking about those issues even more because it's about space. It's not about the human subject, it's about the description of space, it's about emptiness, it's about layering of space, which for me is something that I have usually thought about in relation to the human subject that occupies that space, but now I'm looking at the space itself. How does one convey a narrative through the optical and formal description of space? On the two-dimensional space of the photograph. I'm always aware that I'm looking through the viewfinder of the world that it's going to be translated into a two-dimensional photograph. And my choices come out of that sense of what the final thing is that I'm making. But now, this idea of form, space, and the narrative contained within space, the urban landscape of Harlem, and how to describe, for example, how the space is beginning to dwarf some of the people who inhabit that space. It's scale. The person like this big and the person this big. How the environment is actually beginning to swallow people up, if you will. So all of those formal things are at play in all of my work, but most recently, even more so. And you happened to, you then came back and saw this new work. So I think you know what I'm talking about.
But it still feels
Bearden is fascinating.
but centrally about people still, the newest pieces. Even yes.
When there isn't a figure in there, you're more apt to read yourself, I think, in there.
I see Danny, then at this stage, probably needs our.
I'm looking at our clock, but I'm also wanting to thank you too for, demonstrating how expansive are the number of ways that we can look at an artist's work like Norman Lewis, and how, part of my intention was to gain that expansiveness by having artists who work in a very kind kind of public realm too, to talk about Lewis. So I think we've really expanded the notion of how abstraction is never divorced from reality. I mean, it's very, very interesting, and we could go on for many hours, but I wanted to give it an opportunity for the audience to ask a few questions. We have a few more minutes. Yeah.
But knowing what you know about Lewis's work, working on the exhibition, did you find out something you didn't know? Was there a surprise that you encountered new information or information about it, or took a different shape on deeper investigation in this context?
I think if anything, there weren't surprises, I think, because by the time I was working on the exhibition, I'd been looking at the work for a long time. If there were surprises, I mean, I spent a whole day sitting in that exhibition. I spent lots of days in Philadelphia sitting in that exhibition. If there's a surprise, and I'm not surprised, actually, because I admire the work so much, it's that it just keeps feeding me that there's so much to look at, so much to think about for me, both in the terms of history, in the terms of art history, in issues related to race. I mean, I spend obviously a huge amount of time as a white person trying to figure out what are the racial issues that I can't touch upon, and are they important or are they not important? And I have to know that I'm looking at things in a different way than you might be, but I don't know that that means it's less rich. It may be less rich. There's something so amazing about the work, that just the levels of thinking that it stimulates. And for me, it just seems to get more. And, but you know, that's what great art does. I mean, I think it's interesting to me when people talk about all the other people that are not in the history. There are other people that are not in the history, but I'm not sure that when I find them, I'm going to think they're all as great as he is. There's something more special about him than the fact that he's not in the history. And, you know, it seems like some crazy romantic thing. I spent a lot of time today thinking, I need to write a PS to the experience of this show. And I said, well, I'll just pull up my love affair with Norman Lewis. And, you know, it sort of feels a little bit like that. It's fascinating. But, you know, the more I look at that work, the more I see, the more I want to look at it, the more I want to see more of it, the more I want to think about what its meaning is. And that has a lot to do with that complication. And I think some of that may have to do with my sort of old lady response to some of the not complicated enough things that are being done by an awful lot of people today. Not that there weren't always a lot of people doing uncomplicated things, but there's you know, Norman's not going to knock you over the head like so much of what we see today does. And there's something in that experience that has just been very important. That's too long an answer to your question, but
Thank you.